Hey there YouTubers, this is Amberola1B coming back again with another video presentation for the YouTube channel. Today I'm presenting two children's stories that have been near and dear to me ever since I was a kid. And this is a photo of the original album cover. And the album, my parents purchased it probably back in the very late 50s, early 1960s, and it's always been a favorite of mine. And unfortunately, the original record that was with it was very scratched, and so I'm not going to be playing that copy for you today. The original record was released on the Lion record label, which was a subsidiary of MGM. And like I said, this record, I kind of played it, to death, and so I'm not going to play that copy for you. This is the copy I'm going to be playing for you. It's a reissue of the original album, and with different artwork on the cover, different liner notes on the back. And this one was actually released on the MGM label. And this record is fairly clean. And I don't know how I came across this on eBay. I was looking up some kind of listing for records, and all of a sudden this popped up. And so I said I had to have it to replace the worn copy that I had. And so for your listening enjoyment, we're going to hear two stories, one by Lionel Barrymore, narrating Rip Van Winkle, and one by Kate Smith, narrating Johnny Appleseed. I hope you enjoy it.
Boys and girls, I'm going to try and tell you the story of Rip Van Winkle. You probably know all about him, but, well, of course, Rip wasn't any good at a lot of things, you know. He never did a day's work in his life, and I don't think he ever intended to. Not like you boys and girls. But the main thing that recommended Rip was that he was a very nice fellow, a very kind fellow. Now, many strange things happened to Rip, so I want to try and tell you about him. One rainy day, Rip was just entering his house when Gretchen, his nagging wife, greeted him in her usual fault-finding way.
You're early, mynheer, but early or late it might be better if you weren't here at all. The wood you brought is wet and it won't burn. You're all wet, but I burn. Get out of the way, you lazy beast!
Oh, no, Gretchen, don't kick him. Oh, Gretchen.
I wish I'd kicked you instead. Now look what you've done. You've made your little daughter cry.
Oh, Gretchen.
Shut up, get out of here. You and your lazy beast, both of you, out!
But Gretchen, it's raining cats and dogs. You don't want us to go out in such weather like this.
Out, I say, you and your dog!
All right, now, don't kick Wolf now, please. We'll go. Oh, what a woman. Poor Rip started up the street, Wolf after him, his tail between his legs. Inevitably, it was the same thing. He had but one destination, the mountain. Whenever trouble arrived, the mountain was his one refuge and solace. On his way, the gossiping neighbors looked on curiously and whispered to each other. But Rip paid no attention to them and headed for the mountain. Behind. His beloved mountain, the spur of the Catskills, was before him. He immediately dived into the deep underbrush which led to a pathway up the mountain a pathway worn by Rip's own feet. The miseries of the village, of his vixen wife, were forgotten as he passed groves of larch and birch. Suddenly he turned to Wolf and said, "Wolf, look, so beautiful. The little raindrops in the cobwebs of the rhododendrons, they shine like diamonds. Look, Wolf, look, the wind in the trees. They bow to each other like ladies and gentlemen, like I used to bow to Gretchen before. Well, never mind, Wolf, come on." They went on. All was upward. All at once, Rip stopped. He turned to Wolf and whispered, "Shh, Wolf, don't make any noise. They won't hurt you. They're ghosts. Ghosts of the Indians passing through the trees. See, there's the chief, his medicine men, his brawny bronze tribe, the Algonquins, the Hurons, and the Mohawks, and the Wolf. The whole 5 nations passed through there. They used to hunt here. Then the Dutch fired them away. And then the English fired the Dutch away. And then, well, I guess that's all there is to it. There's nothing to worry about now. Come on, Wolf." So they went on. A church bell in the village sounded very far off as it struck the hour. They were now in the clearing, and the big hickory stood in the middle of it. And there on one of the branches was a big woodcock. Wolf immediately pointed his tail out straight. "Ah, Wolf," said Rip, "there's our lunch." Rip unlimbered his fowling piece and fired. The bird flew away. "Hey, golly," said Rip, "I missed him." Wolf looked up at him through the corner of his eyes. "Well," said Rip, "I'm glad I missed him. You can kill a bird, but you can't give him back his life. All right, Wolf, now I'll have my sandwich with you. Don't look so glum." They were now at the summit, and Rip sat on a fallen log. He looked over the valley below him. "Look, Wolf," he said, "there's the village. The houses look like dolls' houses, so small. See, there's our house. Look, Dame Van Winkle must have put a log on the fire. The smoke comes out through the chimney. You'd like to be lying in front of that fire with your tummy toward it whether you got kicked or not. Well, you're a fool. I'm glad I'm up here, wet or not. Here, Wolf. Here's your half of the sandwich." Was stretched out beneath them, the sun breaking through the clouds, making the ripples on his bosom look like gold. And the boats from the new village of Haverstraw, where they made the bricks, were sailing downstream. Wolf dropped his sandwich and began to growl. "Now what's the matter with you?" said Rip. The dog went over and peered down the other side of the valley. Rip followed him and saw a strange little figure carrying a keg on his shoulder. "Hey, mister, do you need any help?" But the little figure continued upward. At the top of the mountain, he dropped the keg. He looked at Rip but spoke no word. Rip said, "But mister, can't I carry that for you wherever you're going?" Rip shouldered the keg. As the little bearded man pointed the direction, Rip could hear the thunder of an approaching storm. He called this fact to the attention of his new acquaintance, who merely shook his head and pointed, "Follow me." The roaring of the thunder persisted, and through it came the sound of strange voices singing.
Big was the nine pins, sail 'em in a big boat. Down go the nine pins, hear the thunder roll. Set up the nine pins like that wooden soldiers. Oh, 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 oh.
a little glen. There, to Rip's amazement, he saw a gathering of the crew of the Henry Hudson. They were playing at 9 pins, and the rolling of the balls was the reason of the thunder. The advent of the keg froze them all like statues, and all were as silent as the grave. They merely looked at Rip, each with a glance more baleful than his neighbor. Rip's new acquaintance filled many skins with the brew from the keg and handed it about. The crew took it without removing their eyes from Rip. They quaffed down the skins at a gulp, and then set them down and started to sing.
Big wooden 9 pins set up in the big boat. Down go the 9 pins, hear the thunder roll. Fine wooden 9 pins standing in the alley. Down they go like thunder in the deep valley. 1, 2, and 3, ho! Take a drink with me, ho! Good, 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 smoothly down it goes. 1, 2, and 3, ho! One more drink with me, ho! Good, 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 down the hatch it goes. Set up the 9 pins like 9 wooden soldiers. Roll down the big pole, see the soldiers fall. 9 wooden soldiers lying way down under. No more soldiers, no more 9 pins, no more thunder.
They got big voices for such little fellas. Rip's companion handed him another skin, and Rip felt it to be simple politeness to quaff it at a gulp as the crew had done. That's good enough. Give me another, he said. He disappeared. And another. And another. As Rip held out his skin to be refilled, his head began to swim. "Oh, gentlemen," he said, "excuse me, I feel funny." He began to reel. He turned to the little man and said, "My hair, I feel so sleepy." The rest of his speech was inarticulate, and he fell forward. Rip, with his eyes closed, began to snore. 20 years had slipped into the past. The fiery tide of war had swept over the land, and peace had come again. The world forgetting and the world forgot, Rip slept on the bosom of his beloved Catskills. The Hudson rolled on as usual. But what's this? The ground seemed stirring. An old bearded head fought its way through the leaves. It was Rip. He rubbed his eyes and began to groan. "Oh! Where am I? I couldn't have slept out here all night. Oh, but I'm stiff. I remember now. The Henry Hudson, the crew of the Half Moon. Oh, I got rheumatics in my knees. I remember now. The strange little man with the keg, and the party of the 9 pins, and that wicked schnapps. Where's my gun? What's this? Looks like my gun's got rheumatism too. And Wolf! Wolf! Where are you? Wolf! Looks like my whistle's got rheumatics. Oh, that schnapps. Sleeping out all night's no good. What's this on my face? A beard? It's a foot long. In one night. And white. Oh, that schnapps. I guess I better go. Oh, well, when I get home, my wife reckon will give me a rub down, maybe with a broomstick. As Rip approached the village, he met a number of people, but none of them knew him, and he knew none of them. "Those soldiers over there," he said, "they're not the king's men. They're all dressed in blue. I've never seen them before. Where did they all come from? And what are they staring at me? Rip's mind was troubled. Finally, he found his way to his own house. It had gone to pieces. The roof had fallen in. The windows shattered. He entered the house. It was empty and abandoned. Overcome with fear, he called out, "Gretchen! Where are you? Gretchen! Judy, my little daughter! Judy! Where are you? Where are you?" Sadly, he dragged himself to the village. He stopped in front of the inn. He looked at the signboard and called to the innkeeper. "What have you done to King George? You put a cocked hat on his head and painted a blue coat for him."
Why, that's General Washington.
"General Washington? Who's he?"
Who's he? You don't know General Washington? Did you know there was a war?
"A war? What war?" Poor old Rip stood there like a lost soul. The villagers gathered around and looked at each other in amazement. Then a young woman pressed through the crowd. She had a little child in her arms.
Oh, hush, my little Rip. The old man won't hurt you.
The name of the child, the mother, and the tone of voice awakened a train of recollection in his mind, and he asked her, "What's your name?
Judy Gardenier.
And your father's name?"
Rip Van Winkle was his name. It's been 20 years since he went away. We haven't heard from him since.
"Where's your mother?"
Oh, she died a short time ago. She broke a blood vessel in a fit of temper.
Does nobody here know Rip Van Winkle?
Sure, that's Rip Van Winkle over there, leaning against the tree.
Rip looked and saw an exact image of himself the day he went up the mountain. Old Rip was completely confused. Then the young woman asked,
Who are you?
"Goodness knows I'm not myself, I'm somebody else. I was myself last night, but I fell asleep on the mountain, and they changed my gun, and they took my dog, and they made an old man of me. And I can't tell who I am or where I am. Judy, don't you know me? Look at me. I'm your..."
Oh, Father! Father!
And so at last Rip was very happy, and there was great rejoicing in the village. And when Judy asked him where he'd been, Rip said, "I'd met a goblin crew of jolly buccaneers. I sang their songs and drank their brew, and had a darn good time for 20 years.
Once upon a time in America, there was a lumberjack who was a giant, Paul Bunyan. And when this giant walked with his head above the tallest fir tree in Maine, the tallest spruce in Oregon, the tallest pine in Minnesota, his leather boots sounded like this. Paul Bunyan's axe was as large as a big barn door, and he used a 100-foot oak tree for a handle. He'd look down, spy a forest, raise his axe, and then... didn't hear just one tree falling. You didn't hear just two trees falling. That was an entire forest falling in Maine, in Oregon, in Minnesota. And then Paul Bunyan would wipe off his sweat with a piece of fleecy cloud, and he'd laugh like this. He'd laugh like that because he was happy, because he wasn't afraid of a gol darn thing. That's the kind of a giant Paul Bunyan was. None of your mediocrity for Paul. Once upon a time in America, there was another giant, John Henry. He worked on the railroads down in the South. And when he walked with his head above the locomotives in Alabama, in Georgia, and in the Carolinas, his arms would swing and his arms would sound like this. His spike hammer was as heavy as the burden of his race, and everybody knows how heavy that is. He'd spy a pile of rocks for dynamiting, and he'd raise that hammer, and then... You didn't hear just one rock drilled. You didn't hear just two rocks drilled. That was 22.5 miles of rocks, all ready with holes made in them. And then John Henry'd wipe off his sweat with the top of a cottonwood tree, and he'd laugh like this. He'd laugh like that because he was happy, because he wasn't afraid of what little folks said. That's the kind of a giant John Henry was. None of your average citizen for John. And once upon a time in America, in the year 1806, in the month of June, on the borders of the Licking Creek in Ohio, there was another giant, Johnny Appleseed. And when he walked through the forests of Ohio and along the margins of the streams, the creeks, and the rivers of Ohio, through the hills and valleys of Ohio, his footsteps on the fallen leaves of autumn made a sound like this. Did I hear someone whisper, "That's no giant's feet walking"? Did I hear someone whisper that was just anybody walking? Well, I say Johnny Appleseed was a giant greater than John Henry and greater than Paul Bunyan. Little Johnny Appleseed. Listen to his story. At first he had an ordinary name like you or even me. Chapman. Johnny Chapman, people called him, and he never grew taller than 5'6", and his voice was always mild, not the fabric out of which a nation weaves a legend. Johnny had a little job, planting and selling apple trees to folks in Pittsburgh who had gardens. You know Pittsburgh. Listen. That's right. That's Pittsburgh. But you wouldn't have known it in 1806. There wasn't any aluminum company of America. There just wasn't any U.S. Steel. No 500,000 workers, no movies, no jalopies. So help me, not even one football team in Pittsburgh in 1806. But oh, she was a lovely little village. Lovely as a young girl is lovely, growing. Pittsburgh was the gateway to the wilderness. And Johnny planted trees and sold the trees in this young and lovely gateway to the wilderness. And Johnny would hear the pioneers singing and the pioneers talking, passing through this gateway.
My dear one, till my journey's over, I'm heading westward, greener fields to see. You'll have a cabin and a field of clover, for it's so high for me. It's so high for me.
And Johnny watched them go by foot, by horse, by ox-drawn cart. And Johnny gave them seeds to plant out there in Ohio and in Indiana. Just apple seeds. But Johnny knew what a seed can do. Johnny knew how a seed is all there is to your life or my life or to a nation's life. Just a seed and someone to plant it somewhere and see it doesn't die. And he watched them go out of Pittsburgh sunrise and sunset, out into the wilderness they called Ohio and Indiana. And he'd pray for them, for he loved three things: an apple seed, his country, and his God. That's all it takes to make a giant, really. And then one night, an angel came to Johnny.
Confound you, Johnny. What's holding you here? Except a piece of land and a few hogs and your apple trees. Get out there in the wilderness, Johnny. Get out and help them folks make a real right place in that territory. Take plenty of seeds with you, Johnny. Give them all the apple seeds they want. It's God's word, Johnny. What? Wilderness? Land sakes, lad. What's a dark forest and a few hundred bears and a few thousand rattlesnakes and a few million panthers to building a nation? What? Injuns? I'm ashamed of you. Treat a man kindly, savage or not, red or black or white, and he'll shake your hand and call you friend. Get out there and all by yourself plant apple seeds in the wilderness. Seeds that'll bear fruit for folks who'll come after you and whom you'll never live to see. Now get going, Johnny, before I scourge you with my wrath. That's a boy, Johnny. Get a moving.
And Johnny started walking.
Couldn't even hitchhike, couldn't take a train, couldn't hop a bus or fly there in a plane, couldn't yell for help when a hungry wolf went, couldn't call a cop when the engine drums went.
But Johnny in the wilderness clearing ground planted his apple seeds all around, gave away apple seeds to pioneers, walked through Ohio 37 years. And people said,
Funny, was down by Lickin' Creek when there I see in the middle of some small timber and long grass a clearing with a baby apple tree. Fetched it back to the cabin and planted it again. When it gets growed up, I'll do some grafting and clear that hillside yonder, and there'll be apple trees all over it in time for the
Comes
family.
along one day and knocks on the cabin door. "Hello, ma'am," he says in his quiet sort of way. Talks like the Bible, he does. I give him some milk and bread, and when he goes, he gives me these seeds. That was 2 years ago. Jerry and me's going to have a real nice apple.
Don't know his real name. We call him Johnny Appleseed. Don't wear shoes. Dressed in a kind of burlap bag like you see pictures of old prophets. Showed me how to plant apple trees. Give me shoots. I tried to make him stay a piece, but he went on. Got a lot of work to do, he said. Got to get to other settlements and give them seeds.
Johnny was older now, his hair was white.
1809.
Johnny was older now, like America. More and more log cabins in Ohio, and more towns in Ohio.
1812.
Not so many bears, and not so many wolves, not so many Indians as in 1806. But Johnny kept on walking, barefooted, bareheaded, white-bearded,
1822.
with a coffee sack for a pioneer's armor, alone with his angel in his mind and his Appleseed bag over his shoulder.
1827.
Nobody laughed. Everybody loved him. Apple trees grew plump and pink on the green Ohio hillsides and on the flatlands of Ohio, and by the morning glory-covered banks of Licking Creek. Johnny kept walking. And then one night, Johnny's angel came to him again.
What'd I tell you, Johnny? Just a few thousand folks in Ohio when you went out. Now take a squint, Johnny. Towns and settlements galore, and smoke a-pouring through the chimneys. And your apple trees growing all over Ohio, and even into Indiana. We're all mighty proud of you up here, Johnny. Plumb proud. You've done a right fine job making this country bloom. Huh? You're weary? Johnny, I'm ashamed of you. What's 30 years of walking and planting? Look at what Mr. Washington and Mr. Jefferson done. Huh? They're big men, and you're just a measly little runt. Don't let me hear you say anything about any man being little. You're no smaller, and you're no bigger than your brother. Now you just keep a-going, Johnny. Just keep a-going.
Johnny kept walking, seeing towns he hadn't seen before. Cincinnati,
Detroit, Columbus,
Steubenville.
Cleveland, Indianapolis.
meeting men and women who remembered him.
God love you, you bearded old Johnny Appleseed. Sit down and rest. I was around to Ted when you come knocking at the cabin to give my grandfather some seeds. Well, I got a daughter of my own now, and she planted some shoots from those first seeds you gave my grandfather.
What's that you say? My father? Bless me, Johnny. He was killed in the war 1812. He's buried over there under that apple tree. There was only 5 of us when you come here in 1810. Now there's 100 of the family scattered with your apple seed through Ohio.
From Jefferson to Van Buren in 37 years of seeds bursting, trees growing. Even birds and frost, even wind and insects can't kill 37 years of seeding and planting and growing. The War of 1812 was over, and the Erie Canal was done, and steamboats whistled on the river. And there was a man named Jackson, and a man named Clay, and a third they called Daniel Webster. And in the Illinois legislature, a lanky lawyer called Lincoln spoke his little piece. But Johnny kept planting all by himself. And lo and behold, and lo and behold, 100,000 square miles had borne fruit from his apple seeds. 100,000 square miles of America were pink and white from his apple seeds. 100,000 square miles is a lot of ground for a little man to cover, and that's how I know Johnny was a giant. For if that doesn't make a giant, I'd like to know what does. Summer afternoon in 1838, Johnny lay down and died. Now I know a giant doesn't die. I know that anyone who loves a seed and his country and his God lives on in others as a legend, as a dream, as a strength. So America goes on planting. Maybe they're not apple seeds. Maybe there are other kinds of seeds, seeds we don't put in the earth, seeds we grow by acting certain ways. We know what a seed can do to our life or to a nation's life. Johnny showed us that. Just a seed and someone to plant it somewhere and see it doesn't die. You out there, you little men like Johnny Appleseed, you too can be a giant if you know what seeds to plant.
As always, it was a pleasure to have you visiting my site, and I hope you enjoyed this record. Amberola 1B signing off. See you again soon.